Planets themselves have a spirit. They have a consciousness to them. They have a mind, a soul, a memory, feelings, emotions, personalities, all of that. Uh, they don't have it the way that mortals do, but they do have a consistent, continued consciousness that you can communicate with. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how this is even possible. First of all, this isn't just a case of, say, there being a deity that is coming through um, and communicating with you all of the time. There can definitely be a deity. Each planet has a deity. In fact, some planets have several deities associated, depending on which pantheon you're looking at. But obviously, our planets are named after deities. But when you contact the planetary consciousness, you're not necessarily contacting the deity that planet is named after. That planet existed before we named that planet. And that planet existed long before we started worshiping the deity that we named the planet after. I couldn't really say how long the deity has existed because they kind of exist beyond space-time. And that's the thing. Planets have existed for millions of years, and so in comparison to us humans, they basically exist beyond space-time. So the reason why you can connect with a consciousness as such is because if you consider the total consciousness that a planet is going to exhibit over the course of all history and the course of all time, the complete stretch of history that includes the arc of that planet's movement, you'll have to consider the future. And in the future, it's quite likely that humanity will have at least an outpost around that planet, if not settle it, if it's inside of our solar system. Even if it's at the very edges, I'm quite sure that we'll have some sort of military presence, at least on most planets. May not all be staffed by human beings, but if it's got a computer on it, that's enough to start establishing a consciousness just by association with the creatures that have created the computer. So, the planets will easily learn consciousness just by being in contact with us eventually. And since they exist on such a huge time scale, I just think that it's quite possible that since we eventually settle on them, and eventually humans will probably develop more of a psychic bond with their surroundings and more telepath-based technology that allows them to communicate instantaneously. I imagine that at some point they're going to develop singularity consciousness. And if you have one singularity consciousness per planet, then you've got a spirit per planet. Doesn't really matter when we are in comparison to a singularity level spirit is basically beyond time. So you've got a god there. And that's how I think that we can have consciousnesses on planets that kind of understand humans a lot more than you would expect. They understand everything that's going on Earth a lot more than you expected. I think it's because we are part of the evolution of those planetary consciousnesses. We will be part of the evolution of those planetary consciousnesses, and those planets exist at such a large temporal scale that I think they simply, like, they probably don't bother focusing down to minute time segments like years. They likely have such big gravity, and they've got such, like, they've got temporal wells around them as it is. So I'd consider each of them to be a time machine. To us, Earth is a time machine as well. It's just going at 1-to-1 speed. So, and I mean, we consider Earth itself to always have this kind of planetary consciousness to it, the Gaia mind. If Earth has a bio consciousness that's also got all the minerals and gems and all the other things that we think have consciousnesses and souls, then Mars has to have something over there with all the iron that's in it. Venus, the same with all the sulfur. There's crystals on plenty of planets. So they've got to have mystical stuff going on too. The thing that really strikes me about the planetary spirits is that I think they've been in communication with us since we've been able to see the stars in the sky, and I think that they can even communicate beyond us being able to see their light. For instance, it's just quite interesting that the planet Neptune was named for the god Neptune, and it's turned out to be even more Neptunian than you would have expected, as they've scientifically discovered it over time. And the same goes for Pluto, for Uranus, for Saturn, definitely. The more that you look into the actual science of the planets, the more you see it overlaps almost directly with the mythology of the deities they're named for, and the astrological meanings of the planets themselves. It's quite amazing, and it definitely explains why, for the most part, it seems like astronomy and astrology just sort of walk through time hand in hand, not really having to explain themselves too much, because they are managing to pretty much keep their knowledge parallel. Look up astrological meanings for pretty much any planetary body, any non-planetary body, in fact, like down to the very little known trans-Neptunian objects, and you will see just an amazing amount of astrological insight being put into the analysis of what these bodies could have impact-wise on our lives. And it's just amazing how intent humanity seems to be on naming all the objects up in the heavens after a very consistent family of deities. So we've got like a family of planets living up there, a pantheon of related objects who all kind of orbit around each other in certain ways and all orbit together around one central parental figure of the sun. It's very interesting to see what humanity has done with the arrangements of the stars over time and how they've translated that into mythology in a way that has kind of made us always retain the knowledge, even if we don't know that's what we're talking about at the time. If you've learned a bunch of mythology about Mercury, then congratulations, you know about the planet quite a lot. I've got to say that Mercury is very mercurial. If you notice the associated elements, alchemical elements that are associated with those planets, you'll often find that they have quite a lot in common. And they have a lot of common today with the scientific knowledge that we have today, but the texts that we're looking at are from the 13 to 1600s, sometimes into the 1800s. It's pretty impressive how much we were able to infer about what was out there without seeing it, even if we translated it as a deity or a spirit or something a bit more fantastical than a gas giant. Um, I don't think that that's the limitation of what those are. I think that the planet is only one form. The deity is another form. The planetary consciousness is still another form. And so when you connect with the spirit of a planetary consciousness, you are connecting with something that exists far beyond your span of time. Um, and so it knows a lot of things, but it's very cognizant of the fact that you are a temporally limited being. So it will be very careful not to give you knowledge that is incompatible with the time period you're existing in. Um, I think that this is part of its ability to understand when it is that we are. You could say that its calendaring system is sort of based around what information it's allowed to give us at the time, or what information it's allowed to give us at the time is based on its calendaring system. Um, might even be how the storage is set up. But either way, I find that they can tell the future to some extent, but be careful with how much they say about it, because the future itself is actually changeable. So if you say checked 3 years ago to see what the future was, you might want to check again more recently to make sure that the data is still correct. Um, until you reach the future, it can be anything it wants to be. So, I think that the planetary consciousnesses, it's not too hard to tell you how to connect with them, because once you understand that they exist and you start trying to connect with them, they're going to find you. And it's hard to deny a planetary consciousness whenever it rears its head. They are big. So enjoy your new big friends, and just remember they are very, very patient, very, very, very patient.